I was having a conversation a little while ago with a dear friend of mine, and it's about with making a show or movie, sometimes you don't need a reason to create these things. And I honestly couldn't disagree more. With how much time and money and people are on these projects, not to mention how very few people get to have the privilege of telling these things, I think you need a damn good reason for it. And you know what? I'm just going to make an entire video explaining what I think makes a story and what those core reasons are. I'm going to do so by breaking these elements down into three categories, much like a trilogy being the perfect number for a story or having the beginning, a middle, and an end. Sticking with your guns, or tone. I'm going to kind of do this in the sense of layers and starting off with the easier concepts and least self-explanatory, and this first one is tone. Something I noticed screwing up a lot of movies or shows for me is they don't know what they want with it. And I think tone is just more production aspect of everything, not even necessarily the story part, but just the studios and team trying so hard to hit a checkbox that they often forget what they were trying to achieve. For instance, coloring is something I really want to do a whole video on, so I'll keep this part short, but color can tell an entire story and mood, and I keep noticing, like honestly a lot of other people as well, films are going for a much more generalized approach rather than an abstract one as of late. I'll tell you what though, my favorite part of Sinners was the gorgeous colors they showed. That made that movie for me last year. And another part of tone comes from the soundtracks, especially knowing when to use these things together. And I feel like soundtracks have become less and less iconic too, and this is honestly just a really forgotten part of films and stories anymore. I do think, however, the one that suffered the most in this part of storytelling is dialogue. Movies and shows are so afraid to alienate their audiences and accept sometimes these stories won't appeal to everyone, to the point that they can never really hone in on one subject, so they have to add witty and quippy humor or a million lines just to make sure the audience is entertained. The worst insult to me is when I'm watching a story that doesn't expect me to be immersed or have any focus on what's being told, but also constantly berating me with recap after recap of something I just saw 10 minutes ago. Stranger Things. I really just wish most shows and movies could just stop copying this boring story format of it nearly being the same identical piece of media just because that's what did well. Risks have really fallen down the gutter in recent years. I noticed myself watching less and less stories and just going back to reading because quite frankly, I know I'm just going to rewatch the near same thing, just repackaged. I think films need to be okay with accepting the fact some of your audience isn't going to like the character. And just because I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about this show, I'll use Blue Eye Samurai as an example. I loved the fact in a lot of ways Mizu is not really a hero or a villain, she just wants one thing and doesn't care if she does the right or wrong thing in the end. This probably will change as the story progresses, but this character was in a lot of ways very unlikable, especially when the audience expected her to save a girl she was sent to kill, but nope, she just fully committed to killing her. And in the end she still had to kill her captors anyways, making this whole thing completely pointless. This character isn't forgivable just because we follow her journey. I have a strong feeling by the end of this show, it's going to show us with how much harm and terror that she's caused and rained down on other people that she will basically be no different than the people she originally set out to kill. And another movie I'll give as an example as to sticking with its guns was The Batman. It was unapologetically atmospheric with its tone. I barely remember there being any day scenes in that film. I do, however, have to admit I found the Riddler more funny than I should have. This concludes this part of creating a story. I think this one is pretty easy to get an idea of, which brings me on to the second element. Challenge or obstacle or twist. Now, this is going to be a much bigger mouthful of topics to cover, but I feel like all three of these things go hand in hand. The first part of this being the challenge. I think this is probably one of the biggest parts to any story, and it's almost always a given. The challenge is very much connected to the obstacle. What is weighing this character down that we feel a part of? A huge advantage of what makes this immediately work is the fact that this creates curiosity in the viewer. We're presented with something that will lead the rest of the journey that we want to see the conclusion of. And this challenge and obstacle can take so many different shapes and forms, such as writing a script, or maybe the literal on-the-nose obstacle being a boulder. Or how about a character painting their dream house, maybe the corporate boss, or how about the villain that shaped our protagonist, which often happens to be the most popular. You see, a big reason why this part matters is because chances are you cannot make a story without this part. Could you imagine starting off the story with the character winning and never going back to that obstacle, and the story just follows the blissful part of the protagonist arc? See, whether we know it or not, we like seeing struggle. But what most of us like seeing more is a character that overcomes that struggle and reaching the peak of that hill they so desperately climbed. We love seeing the result of struggle. I mean, just think about how many movies you love that introduce these challenges, and imagine it's all of them. Now this moves me on to one of my favorite parts of a story, the twist. Which in a lot of ways feels just like the effect of life throwing you a huge curveball and completely derailing where you thought you were going. The reason the twist works so well in this part is the fact it presents a whole new challenge, not necessarily to the character, but to you. This story built a guardrail for you to follow along. It presented fake rules just for it to completely shatter that bubble. The biggest version of this is when the character throws you a twist. Maybe something as dramatic as betraying you and being the real antagonizer, or maybe the story completely keeps a secret from you. Unfortunately though, however, most twists in stories have been dumbed down to about 3 repetitive motions, really taking away from something that can oftentimes be a fun way to pull the audience in and throw them in a totally different direction. And this is usually followed with lazy twists, followed along with lazy writing, pretending like it did something super clever, but a twist is only as smart as the writer. I do think this nicely and concisely captures all 3 of these, however, which will bring me on to my last point. Purpose and messaging. If you're going to spend hours and wait years of your life to create something, I think at some point you might want to ask why. What is it you want to achieve or create? Now, this whole video is based on only my beliefs for what I think makes a story. If I didn't make that clear, I'm just going to 100% express that now. And this kind of feels like a personal subject to me. I mean, I really remember thinking as a kid, when I grew up, I want to be a director, and I discovered this passion about 6 and had it until 17 until I realized, you know what? Maybe I don't want to devote my soul and heart towards a disgusting and vain industry that would much rather appreciate product than admiration. I think this passion comes down to 2 stories for me in particular. The earliest being the Bible, and this is something I don't really find myself talking about too much nowadays, the older I grow. And the second story being Marvel. These were the movies and stories that invoked this spark in me for creation. The idea of the hero, the sacrifices required to truly being a good person and truly doing something for good, not for reward, but based on the simple fact it's just the right thing, no excuses. Those were 2 stories that really sparked this in me as a kid. And now back to the reason. I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Where do you get that spark of creation from? Is this anger, fear, grief, sadness, or happiness, or a bigger understanding? Creating a story is to create art. And to create art, you must pour yourself into whatever it is. What does that look like? Let us in on that shell. Show some expression, no matter how big of a spark that is, whether or not that's going to offend or inspire people or make a statement. Commit to it. And most importantly, what is that message? I'm sorry, but a story for me doesn't end just because the credits roll. I want you to leave me a bread trail. I want to find those crumbs. I want you to give me something that shows these parts. I want you to give me something that lets me reflect and consume and digest. I want to watch that story back with a newfound understanding, finding a message that was in front of my face the whole time I was too blind to see the first time consuming it. And I want to sit there and digest it for weeks on end. Christopher Nolan, I am looking at you. Because damn it, you knew how to make me obsessed with the philosophical messaging of the Dark Knight films. And I'm also looking at the Hunger Games with a very specific warning about a tyrannical power. A large reason why these things matter to me so much is the fact I don't want to just feel like a damn chimp at the end of the day, never questioning thought or existence. I love these ideas. I love asking yourselves, what's the bigger canvas of existence? And stories are truly one of the most beautiful forms of expression in this. And God, don't even get me started on Daredevil Season 3. I absolutely adore these stories that just let you get immersed into a lens reflection of your own world in a much deeper and more complexing life for you to examine these intricate parts of your life. Just the pure magnitude and passion and raw attitude. I mean, can you truly tell me what's a more beautiful expression than this? The talent and drive of these productions, just the raw achievements in storytelling. Do you even know how crazy it is that we can create fictional things like a dragon all the way back in 2013 just to entertain and intrigue curiosity and to stop perplexing the what if and the what can't we do? During challenging times, stories were my great escape to experience what I know I wanted and needed. I've never looked back at the man that I've become today, and you know what? I don't want these stories to go away because sometimes I think we all want to feel like a kid again and experience the what cans of this realm. And that's what I believe makes a story. And that's what I think should be created. And you know what? I think that's all I can really say about this anymore. If you wish to support me in being able to maybe one day take creating stories or maybe capturing life experiences, then subscribing might just help me achieve that and find more time for it. Also, when I hit 1K subs, I will bake a cake, so I think that's going to be a pretty cool thing, if you ask me personally. But with all that being said, thank you for watching and listening to me, and I really appreciate that, and I hope you have an amazing day. Goodbye.